guys, welcome. So this week's case is covering the case of missing person Susan Cox Powell. Susan was a wife to Josh Powell, and a mother to Charlie and Braden Powell. Susan went missing on December 7th, 2009. Growing up, Josh had a very weird upbringing. There was always problems with his mother and father. His mother, Teresa, and father, Steve, had 5 kids altogether. There was Jennifer, Josh, John, Mike, and Alina. Steve always treated the boys differently than he treated the girls. He always made them go against each other for some reason. And he would always tell the boys that girls were only good for one thing, their body, and that's it. He even shared pornography with all 3 of his sons. He constantly had a camcorder in his hand recording, almost like a video log. He was sexually interested in his oldest daughter, Jennifer, and he would even write about his feelings for her in his journals. He even went on and told the kids that their belief in the Book of Mormon was false. That was when Steve and Teresa decided to take a break and Steve moved out of the house. At the age of 13, Josh threatened his mother with a butcher's knife. He also killed his youngest sister, Alina's gerbils, and forced her to touch the blood. At 14 years old, he attempted to hang himself, but he failed and had a rope burn on his neck from the act. Josh finally met a girl named Catherine, who he had been dating for not that long. During the time they were together, Catherine realized Josh was controlling her personal life and funds. She wasn't even allowed to go see her family without him being there. However, she was lucky enough to get out of the relationship. Josh ended up meeting Susan in November of 2000, when Susan was just 19 years old and Josh was 24. They were in the same class in college. It was a class called Institute, a religion class for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Since the beginning, the two knew they were the one for each other. They talked early on about marriage, and Josh met Susan at JCPenney, where she worked behind the jewelry counter one day. He asked her to help him pick out a ring for his mother. They ended up choosing a ring together, and he actually asked her if she could buy it with her discount and he would pay her back. So they did. However, that ring was actually not for his mom. It was for Susan. Just 2 months after dating, they were engaged. Her family and friends were very concerned. They ended up getting married on April 6, 2001 in Portland, Oregon. And a little time into their marriage, Josh started using Susan's money to pay for things like parts for his computer. 8 months after living together, the two were evicted from their apartment. They were then forced to move in with Steve, Josh's father, in the beginning of 2002. The living situation was not ideal. There was not enough bedrooms for Steve, Josh, Susan, and the 2 other Powell boys, John and Michael. They had to cope with what they had, and hung sheets in the living room to section off some space for a bed and their things. Josh and Susan found it difficult living there. Steve, John, and Mike came and went at all hours of the night, making it extremely difficult for them to even get sleep. Steve constantly was recording with his camcorder, and he mainly recorded Susan. She always was just trying to be nice while he recorded, but she was being naive. Steve would even take small mirrors and place them underneath the bathroom door while Susan was in there. Finally, in March, they were able to get their own place again. Susan got a raise at her job, while Josh ended up losing his. In June, Josh finally graduated and Steve attended the graduation. However, his main focus was recording Susan. After graduation, Josh struggled with keeping a job. He wanted to be a self-made millionaire. And in 2003, they began working as a management team at Senior Park. Here they got to live rent-free, where they decided to begin paying off the debt that they had. But Steve was always watching the two from afar. He became deeply infatuated with Susan when she lived with them, and he would visit their apartment multiple times. One time, while he was there, he offered Susan a massage. So she allowed him to rub her feet and shoulders. He then began taking advantage of Susan, and he thought Susan consented in silence. Steve wanted Susan for himself and wanted his own son Josh out of the picture. A few months later, they both lost their job at Senior Park, and they were able to get some of their debt down and decided that they eventually wanted to have kids, just not yet. Steve was constantly visiting Josh and Susan, and he actually eventually bought a home recording studio to try and impress Susan with his music. His own desktop background for his computer for his music was of Susan. He got Susan to get into his car at one point to take her home to her parents' house. And during this hour-long car ride, he was recording the entire conversation without actually knowing it. And it was pure agony for Susan. Steve kept trying to explain how he felt about her, and Susan was very uncomfortable. She kept trying to change the subject and was shooting him down, but he persisted. He finally dropped Susan off and went home. Steve is very open about talking to his youngest daughter, Alina, about his infatuation with Susan. He would always tell Alina about what had happened with Susan, and Alina's advice was to accept that Susan is a player and that is what players do. He later found the recording of them in the car and kept playing it over and over. He then came to the realization that Susan never actually rejected him. Susan ended up telling Josh what had happened with her father-in-law, and Josh told Steve, "I guess craziness runs in our family." Steve's response was that Susan led him on and that he was just reacting to what she was doing. Steve didn't see his father for a few months after that, but they did talk on the phone when Susan wasn't around. Around October, things were going back to normal with Josh and Steve. And Steve actually visited once, and Susan locked herself in her bedroom because she didn't want to see him. She was so upset with her father-in-law that he did this and that her husband wasn't doing anything about it. Josh and Susan came to a conclusion finally to move far away from Steve, so they ended up moving to Utah in December of 2003. When they first got to Utah, they lived with Josh's sister Jennifer before finally buying their own home in January. Susan finally had her first baby in January 2005. A little boy named Charlie. Her parents had to travel to Utah to take Susan to the hospital to deliver the baby because Josh was too busy tinkering with his computer. When Josh finally arrived at the hospital, an hour late, he just sat in the windowsill with his laptop. Once Charlie was born, Josh was acting different. He was actually proud of having a son. Even after Charlie was born, the marriage was still rocky. They were constantly fighting, and Susan was the only one bringing home money, while Josh just spent it all. Susan desperately tried so hard for the marriage to work. She would constantly tell him she will do anything to make them stay together, even after Charlie's grown up. She was making so many sacrifices just to please him. In 2007, Susan left her job, and they took a second mortgage out on their home to try and get by. Susan learned she was pregnant again. On January 2nd, 2007, Susan gave birth to another boy, Brayden. They still struggled with money, and Josh made Susan get rid of her car to pay for other things. At this point, they only had one car, which was a minivan, and Susan wasn't even allowed to drive it. She was forced to ride a bike 15 miles to and from work in 2008, and she was the sole provider for her family. She was constantly battling in her mind if she was better off being married or being a single mother the way that she felt she was. Josh eventually changed all of the passwords to their accounts, so Susan was no longer able to access money. And he would constantly buy stuff for himself, but when it came to Susan or the boys, she wasn't allowed to buy anything. She also had to get the cheapest groceries. They were constantly fighting in public and even in front of their friends and family. And at one point, Susan slapped Josh, and Josh said that that was the last time she was going to do that before he hit her back. Susan desperately wanted a divorce, but she was scared Josh was going to take everything, and he threatened her at one point saying, "Over my dead body, will you leave me? And over my dead body, will you take my boys?" She even was scared of Josh might have killed her. Josh pushed Susan to get a 5-year term life insurance. He first purchased a $500,000 policy in June of 2007, and then in March 2008, he bumped it up to $1 million, and he was the sole beneficiary. He also had $1 million life insurance for himself and $250,000 for each of his boys. Susan reaches out to her friends at work in an email and explains her concern for her life.
This is me, July 29th, 2008. It is 12:33 Mountain Time. Covering all my bases, making sure that if something happens to me or my family or all of us, that our assets are documented. Hope everything works out and we're all happy and live happily ever after as much as that's possible. Today is Tuesday, July 29th, 2008, and we are in the 6254 West Sarah Circle house. This is me. Hi. Sorry. And it is, can you see that? 11:44 a.m. And I am documenting all our assets just in case of any emergencies, fire, flood, damage, disputes.
One day at work, Susan wrote a will for herself. In her will, she wrote about her situation with Josh and expressed her fear for her and her children's lives. She wanted a paper will to trace back to her. She even mentioned that if she were to go missing, there are certain people they need to talk to. She would tell her coworkers, "If I die, it might not be an accident, even if it looks like it is." Susan got a safety deposit box with things like birth certificates and social security cards for her and her 2 boys. She kept all documents that would help in the case of a divorce. On the morning of December 7th, 2009, Debbie, the home daycare worker, was waiting for the boys to show up. She was worried when Charlie and Braden didn't show up on time, which is odd, but she thought it was due to the snowstorm that had occurred. She tried calling the house, but no one answered. She called Susan's work phone, but still no answer. When she called Josh's work phone, they told her that he had not shown up that day. The first thought was carbon monoxide poisoning due to them getting their furnace fixed. Debbie began calling the emergency contact on file, which was Jennifer, Josh's older sister. Jennifer and her mother, Tricia, drove to their home and called the police. When the police finally showed up, they got inside and found that none of them were there. There was 2 box fans that were on facing the couch, and they ended up finding Susan's purse in the bedroom. The family minivan wasn't there either in the garage. All 4 of them were then officially missing. They realized both Josh and Susan had never showed up for work that day, and this is when the detective was called in. When he examined the home, he noticed there was no sign of a struggle. He noticed the fans and knew that the couch had recently been cleaned. Some time went by and a neighbor approached Detective Ellis. She told him that she finally got in contact with Josh, and this same neighbor was the last person to see the family before they went missing. When the neighbor talked to Josh on the phone, she had explained that they couldn't find Susan and that he and the boys need to get back home right now. Josh and the boys finally started heading home. Josh's sister Jennifer called him and she asked where he had been, and he said that he was at work with the boys, and she knew he was lying. He finally admitted to taking the boys camping, and they were caught in the storm. Josh had claimed that Susan was at work, and Jennifer told him that she was not there, and she asked, "Where is she?" And Josh said, "I don't know." "What do you know?" And Jennifer knew Josh did something to her. Josh went to meet Jennifer and Detective Ellis at his house. However, Josh showed up almost 10 hours later. He took his time to get home. He explained that the reason he was gone and his phone was off was because he and the boys went on an impromptu camping trip in Utah's West Desert, and a very significant blizzard hit. The boys were 2 and 4 at this time. Detective Ellis took Josh straight to the station for questioning, and there he learned that the last time Josh saw Susan was around midnight, so about 18 hours ago. Josh claimed that Susan asked him to clean the couch at around 10 p.m., and he set the fans up so the couch would dry. During the interview, Josh kept trying to talk to his kids and focus on them instead of answering questions with Ellis. Josh told Ellis he mixed up the days and thought it was actually Sunday, not Monday, and he didn't realize it was Monday until that morning when they woke up. Ellis asked Josh where Susan's cell phone was, and Josh said he didn't know. However, police ended up finding Susan's phone in the minivan. hidden, along with a blue tarp in the back, a lot of unopened camping stuff, tools, a humidifier, an extension cord, a circular saw, box cutter, a handsaw, and gloves. After finding Susan's phone, they asked Josh why he had it, and he said that he forgot. However, he had even called Susan 2 times and left voicemails on her phone. Josh was not helping the case at all. He didn't seem to really care. Josh was never charged with anything, and everyone always asks, why didn't they take him to jail? The last thing the police wanted to do was charge Josh and him get free because they didn't have a body of Susan. Josh ended up going home with the boys that night and agreed to meet with Ellis again the next morning at 9 a.m. However, Josh didn't show up until almost 3 hours later because he was too busy cleaning his van and his home and doing laundry. Police also were asking the 2 boys questions. Charlie confirmed that Josh took them on a camping trip, but he said that Susan went with them but didn't come back. A few weeks later, Charlie told his teacher that his mom was dead, and Braden, the youngest son, drew a picture at daycare of the van with 3 people inside and said that Mommy was in the trunk. Josh eventually got an attorney and had planned to move the boys back home with his father, Stephen. Soon after, Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy, got custody of the boys, and during this time, Josh wasn't allowed to have the boys without a social worker present. On September 22nd, Stephen was arrested on charges of voyeurism and child pornography after police found secret videos of girls and women, including Susan. On February 5th, 2012, the social worker took the boys over to Josh's home. The boys got out of the car and ran inside immediately to go see their father. This is when Josh slammed the door and locked it so the social worker could not enter. She was concerned, and this is when she called 911.
Reporting. Hey, I'm on a supervised visitation for a court-ordered visit, and something really weird has happened. The kids went into the house, and the parent, the biological parent, whose name is Josh Powell, will not let me in the door. What should I do?
What's the address?
It's 8119, and I think it's 89th. I don't know what the address is.
Okay, that's pretty important for me to know.
Sorry, I can't. Just a minute. Let me get in my car and see if I can find it. Nothing like this has ever happened before at these visitations, so I'm really shocked. And I could hear one of the kids crying, but he still wouldn't let me in. Okay, it is just a minute, I have it here. You can't find me by GPS?
No.
Okay, it is, I still can't find it. But I think I need help right away. He's on a very short lease with DSHS, and CPS has been involved. And this is the craziest thing. He looked right at me and closed the door. Are you there?
Yes, ma'am. I'm just waiting to know where you are.
Okay. It's 8119 189th Street, Court East, Puyallup, 98375. And I'd like to pull out of the driveway because I smell gasoline, and he won't let me in.
You want to pull out of the driveway because you smell gasoline, but he won't let you...
He won't let me in.
He won't let you out of the driveway?
He won't let me in the house.
Whose house
Got
is
the
it?
kids in the house, and he won't let me in. It's a supervised visit.
I understand. Whose house is it?
Josh Powell.
Okay, so you don't live there, right?
No, I don't. No, I'm contracted to the state to provide supervised visitation.
I see. Okay. And who is there to exercise their visitation?
I am. And the visit is with Josh Powell.
And who
And
supervises?
he is the husband that I supervise.
So you supervise and you're doing the visit?
Yeah,
You're
I
supervising
supervise
yourself?
I supervise myself. I'm the supervisor here.
Wait a minute. If it's a supervised visit, you can't supervise yourself. If you're the
I
visitor...
do supervise myself. I'm the supervisor for the supervised visit.
Okay, well, aren't you the one making the visit? Or is there another
I'm the
parent
one-
that you're supervising?
No, I'm the one that supervises. I pick up the kids at their grandparents.
Yes. And then who visits with the children?
Josh Powell.
Okay, so you're supposed to be there to supervise supervised Josh Powell's visit with the children.
Yes, that's correct.
And how did...
And he's the husband of missing Susan Powell. This is a high-profile case.
How did he gain access to the children before you got there?
I was one step in back of them.
Okay, so they went into the house and then he locked you out.
Yes, he shut the door right in my face.
All right, now it's clear. Your last name?
My name is Elizabeth Griffin Hall.
Griffin Hall is hyphenated?
Yes.
And what's your phone number, Elizabeth?
This cell phone number is 360-990-9955.
And what agency are you with?
Foster Care Resource Network. And the kids have been in there by now approximately 10 minutes. And he knows this is a supervised visit. 2. Braden is 5 and Charlie is 7.
And the dad's last name?
Powell, P-O-W-E-L, L.
2 L's? 2 L's at the end of Powell?
Yes.
His first name?
His first name is Josh.
Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, native?
He's white.
Date of birth?
I don't know. He's about 39.
How tall?
5'10", 150 pounds.
Hair color?
Brown.
Did you notice what he was wearing?
No, I didn't notice what he was wearing.
Is he alone then, or is anybody
I
else?
don't know. I couldn't get in the house.
Are you in a vehicle now or on foot?
I'm in a vehicle. I'm in a Prius, a 2010 Prius,
What color
with
is
the
it?
doors locked. But he hasn't opened the door.
Ma'am,
I rang the
careful.
doorbell and everything.
What color
I
is it?
begged him to let me in.
Elizabeth, please listen to my questions. What color is the Toyota Prius?
Gray, dark gray.
And the license number?
I don't know. I can look. 750ZMH.
Zebra Mary Henry?
Yes.
All right, we'll have somebody look for you there.
Okay, how long will it be?
I don't know, ma'am. They have to respond to emergency, life-threatening situations first. The first available deputy
Well,
is responding.
this could be life-threatening. He went to court on Wednesday, and he didn't get his kids back. And this is really, I'm afraid for their lives.
Okay, has he threatened the lives of the children previously?
I have no idea.
All right, we'll have the first available deputy contact you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Soon after, the house exploded, killing Josh and his 2 sons. It was a double murder-suicide. He had killed his sons with a hatchet and blew up the home. Right before Josh killed them, he wrote emails to friends and family saying goodbye. After a year, Josh's brother Michael took his life. It was said that Michael was an accomplice in killing and getting rid of Susan Powell. To this day, Susan was never found. But the West Valley Police have closed the case, and her family is actively trying to officially pronounce Susan dead. Stephen Powell was also thought to be an accomplice as well, but he was in prison during the time of the disappearance. He finally got out of prison, and he died of natural causes in 2018. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this case today. It was a little longer than usual, but the details are absolutely crazy. It is just so sad that this family lost everything, and I can only hope that one day Susan's body is found. I would absolutely love if you subscribe to my channel for the new videos that I post each week. Until next time, my true crime friends. Bye!